Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Friday Women in Architecture webinar for the role of environmental psychology and design. My name is Erin. I am the chair for Women in Architecture New Jersey, and I'm really honored to be here with Evie. Dr. Eve Klein is a college friend of mine, a university grad school friend from UCLA. We studied architecture and urban planning together in Los Angeles just a couple years ago, and I'm just really thrilled that she has agreed to do this webinar with us. I fell upon her via reading a book by Lori Mazer that page one starts talking about Evie. And that's led us to have a wonderful reconnect this past week, especially where she was Monday with our group in Princeton University. Because this webinar was set up specifically to also support Princeton University's Women in Construction Week. Today, I'm going to do a quick overview here. We're going to look at the principles of environmental psychology, how they can be applied to the design and operation of facilities. Today's webinar will also expand outside of facilities, really in our places, in our design to promote well-being, enhance culture, and to be aligned with the mission in a project. When you walk away, we hope that you will be able to describe how environmental psychology principles can be applied to design to improve health and well-being, that you'll be able to analyze safety implications of environmental design, as well as apply environmental psychology methodologies to improve the planning, construction, and maintenance of practices of design projects, particularly in cultural and educational settings, although it's going to be more broadly presented. Four, to assess how inclusive design can foster a sense of community and well-being, ensuring equal access, and creating spaces that promote positive emotional responses for all the users, especially in educational, cultural settings and beyond. And then lastly, to evaluate how environmental design can align with with an organization's mission and goals to enhance workplace culture, well-being, safety, and fostering a healthier and more productive environment that supports organizational success, top down, bottom up. Next, we will just say welcome. We're very grateful for everybody for signing up and attending. Your attendance and your engagement, is powerful for everybody. The more we engage, the more we can do. We will have questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to add that to the questions or comments into the Q&A section, which should be like at the bottom of the page or at the top, depending on how your Zoom layout is. And myself and Evie can both see those questions as they come in. AIA New Jersey is already collecting the AIA numbers for record, and if you don't have an AIA number, you will get a certificate from Christina Goldstein from the state. And I just ask that people please go to the AIANJ.org WIA Women in Architecture WIA page to see more WIA events. Next week we'll be in New York at the New York Build. There are a handful of us will be on panels. And I also ask that you support the Equity Committee. We are doing a number of joint efforts together on April 10th, we have another webinar. And then there's actually going to be a cool film thing happening. So Women in Carbon will be coming up. So keep your eye out for that. Stay tuned. It's not live yet. So Evie, that's a lot. And then there's a lot about Evie because she is, really loaded with richness. She is an architectural design researcher, professor, independent scholar, doing her own work, specializing in the social and psychological impact of the built environment. She focuses on how social science methodologies enrich design processes, particularly, like we said earlier, in cultural and institutional settings. Her doctoral research for her PhD, congratulations, Evie, investigated informal learning environments in higher education, highlighting their role in fostering inclusion and promoting social equity. She brings this expertise to her teaching at Pratt, where she leads seminars on environmental psychology, urban studies, and community engagement, along with a workshop on embodiment and design. In addition to the academic work, Evie trains designers and organizational leaders to develop rigorous research processes that leverage data for informed decision-making and design. She also collaborates with designers, architects, engineers on project-based initiatives, integrating research-driven insights into practice. She also, in the community, serves as chair for the board of directors for the Design Trust for Public Space. She is a co-founder of the Social Science and Architecture Committee for AIA New York. Previously, she was the AVP of Strategic Assessment Planning and Design at NYU, and she has her bachelor's from Vassar, a master's in architecture from UCLA, and a PhD in environmental psychology from the Graduate Center in CUNY. Her interdisciplinary approach advances ethical, inclusive, and impactful design practices. So that is my introduction for Evie. If I missed anything, it's now your turn to take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's really good to be here, and I'm imagining all of the folks who've signed on to the webinar, and I appreciate your interest. And I have had a chance over this last week, and then last week a little bit too, to try to absorb what this community is. And so I'm going to be able to sprinkle in and weave a little bit throughout my talk as to what some of the things I noticed from conversations I had over the last 2 weeks with the New Jersey, Princeton women in construction communities. And as Erin said, I've trained and practiced as an architect, pursued my PhD in environmental psychology, worn various hats in these different roles as a professor, as a nonprofit leader. And I'm hoping or my objective is to share some of those weavings together to you, because while it feels and it can sound like it's a lot of different roles, they really stitch together into a type of approach that is holistic and combines a depth and a breadth, and also can be applied. So this is sort of the weaving together that I'm hoping to bring to this conversation today. I think just the interesting AIA link that Erin did mention, which was it was 10 years ago. I had to literally like go back and look at my files. But it was 10 years ago that I co-founded with Melissa Marsh the Social Science and Architecture Committee at the AIA New York chapter. And it's the only committee with those sets of interests aligned and stated as such in the AIA. But we're 10 years and going. And so, and we've passed leadership on many generations. There's been like 4 sets of co-chairs since Melissa and I started it, which I think is a testament to there really is the capacity to do this kind of work with integrating social sciences into architecture without having to get a PhD, right? So I sort of offer that as an invitation to stepping in at whatever level your interest drives you to or leads you to. And I will use the term social sciences sometimes interchangeably with environmental psychology. So just sort of to kind of give you a heads up around that. And the goal of what we're doing today is to help what we do in our jobs work towards good, right? We want what we do to matter to the communities we serve, the institutions, the clients, and the people who use those spaces. So jumping into the beginning of my what I'm going to kind of cover today. Which is the role of environmental psychology in the design process, and I use and I think maybe speaking to the folks who I think are on this webinar, it's both designers, it's people who work for institutions, and people who operate various aspects of facilities, probably a lot of other roles, but I'm going to speak to with those in mind, especially, and hopefully this is aligning. With this, so again, with this idea, what can we in facilities do that is most important to people who use the space? And then with the themes of the week, what can we as women and allies do in facilities that is most important for people to use this space? So I add that because as you'll hear me weave through, where can our history and our theories and our academic underpinnings inform us and guide us? And I do think that there are some important anchors that we can take from those from that the idea of being being women and allies. Um, so I think that these three core ideas will be carried through today, which is how to meet people's needs, and some needs are hard to know, right? So that's the social science aspect of the research. When needs are hard to know, how do we go about finding that out? What does it look like to apply rigor to the guides we use to understand what matters to people? And what are the tools that we have to do that? And what other tools might we want? So keep that in mind as I'm going through this talk. If there's anything else that you have questions about, um, start to keep those. You can put them in the chat as not the chat. Sorry, you can put them in the Q&A as Erin mentioned, and we'll kind of come to that at the end. Um, and what's the rationale for including environmental psychology in design? I think one is to inform practice, to change the way you practice and integrate different sort of methods or query or inquiry to the work you do, whether it's managing or designing spaces. The other is for advocacy. And by advocacy, I mean it's using research to bring design into alignment with values and goals. This term first came up using research for advocacy came up at the beginning of the social science and architecture work at the AIA, where we had a team of social scientists and architects who were working for. Sorry, there was a team of architects who were doing a lot of work with school construction authority, and they really wanted to advocate for which was had some very rigid standards for reasons that are totally justified, but they wanted to be able to have some data to justify why they wanted to have a variation for the corridor width, because they felt that these informal spaces, the corridors, had added a lot of value. So they wanted some data to bring to advocate for their position to allocate a little bit more space to corridors and have some variations with what could happen in those corridors. So that's just an example of what advocacy can mean. And then design and operations. And I think through sometimes because of our work roles are very siloed, it can be hard to identify, it's a little bit of like you give a person a hammer and they're going to hammer and nail, and that's what they're going to use, even if this would have been better handled with a piece of tape. So I think this is the example of like, if when you're in operations or design, how you can start to recognize, oh, this is actually an operational question, not a design question, or the other way around. So I think that sometimes taking a slightly different interdisciplinary approach to a condition can bring some great insights about what the tool actually might need to be. So what is environmental psychology? It's a discipline that looks at human behavior in a setting. And you can see from each of these images, these are images of different settings. And you don't need to be an environmental psychologist to understand that each of these settings has a different set of rules, norms, and are supported by design and operations accordingly. But I think that the tip is to, when would you want to apply some social science or environmental psychology tools into a design process, which is that if you or management, which is if there's a deficit, if there's a community that's not served, if there's something that the space isn't doing that you want it to do a little bit differently, you want a different set of tools and just repeating the model of what's come before. So I think that's what the invitation comes to expand and broaden what those tools are when you're engaging in something that you want to shift a bit. And so here's one of the leaders, the founders of the field. His name is Kurt Lewin. He's from Germany. He was a psychologist. He immigrated to the United States in the 1930s when you couldn't be a scholar, intellectual, or Jew in Germany at that time. So he immigrated to the United States, and he was really at the forefront of what became the field of environmental psychology. And the key, I use Lewin. There were a lot of other people who followed him that were really important for the founding of the field, but I use Lewin as sort of the anchor figure here because he was the first one to really declare that you can't study human behavior in a lab. And he was interested in providing rigor around how the social, economic, and political experiences overlap with the setting. So the setting and the person overlap in these contexts, and that makes for these everyday ecologies. And by ecologies, he means the space around us. And the other thing that I like to share about Lewin is that he was a psychologist working at looking at people, human space interactions in a time when psychology was really like at the margins of being considered a field. And so he wanted to bring sort of justifications for why psychology should be considered like a hard science in terms of the studies. And so he developed this equation. Behavior as a function of both a person and the environment, right? So he wrote it out like a mathematical equation, but yet sort of like those images, it's like, well, you didn't really need to write that out as an equation because you're not actually calculating large data sets with that equation. But he did it to really kind of become accepted as an academic field, to have this kind of field psychology be accepted as an academic field. And also what I really like about this is he also takes the opportunity to really define and describe what a person is. And I'm going to go ahead and read this because I think it's important, which is that a person includes or P equals the entirety of the person, including their past, their present, their expectations of the future, their personality, their capabilities, their motivations, and their desires. And the environment includes all aspects of the person's environment at the time of any behavior, including their physical environment, but also their social environment and contexts. So I think this really expands the the way we think of what a person is and the ways that interacts with their environment. What are the characteristics of what the field of environmental psychology can do? What it does is it studies the human environment relationships as a unit. It studies the interrelationships of people, place, and space. And then importantly, there's a relative lack of distinction between applied and theoretical research. It tends to be problem oriented, but very dependent upon looking at the theory that underpins the conditions with the intention of applying it into a context. The fourth one is a really important one, which is that it values participation in the research. In fact, participatory action research is one sort of subsection of participatory research that values or states that the participation is itself one of the outcomes, so that people, by participating, have in fact changed and become part of the solution through participation. So it's not just the data that's collected, it's the act of participating. So that's kind of an important value to keep in mind. And then lastly, that interdisciplinary methodology is always employed. And so that's something that can be because different settings call for different methods. So I think that it's a little bit of that, like recognizing where you are and what might be needed to be applied at the moment. So here I'm going to just talk about what it looks like for that first square about being practice-based. What are some of the ways that practice-based you can develop your practice to have more kind of environmental psychology rigor and tools. These six, this is not exhaustive, but these are the six that I think are most sort of critical and encompassing and applicable, easy to integrate. I shouldn't say easy, because if it were easy, we would all be already doing it, but accessible to integrate into a design approach and practice. And I'm going to just sort of name these six, but then I'm going to go into the first three in a little bit more depth. One is the literature review. The other is incorporating historical and contextual analysis, community engagement strategy. Fourth is really paying attention to sensory and embodied research. The fifth is integrating social science ideas into design review. And when I say ideas, it could be that you have a set of principles that you've established from the beginning that you want to be checking along the way in a design review process. It could be that you have a group of stakeholders and partners that are part of a design process, the design review process. So it could be different for different projects, but it's not just doing something at the beginning or not just doing something at the end, but that you're incorporating it along the way. And then lastly, post-occupancy evaluation, or I like to call it existing building assessment, because post-occupancy has a strange implication that it's after that there's a before and an after, and usually people didn't do an evaluation before occupancy. So there's a funny kind of measurement um, assumption that's usually not the case. So I just like thinking of it as an existing building assessment. But these are super valuable. And most architects, when that comes up in conversation, they're like, oh yeah, we should do that, but we don't. So these are some of the ways to connect. Again, this is, you can imagine this can be applied in a lot of different ways, and you would want to navigate what is most appropriate for your project. But I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on what the value of the literature review is. As in academia, every study starts with a literature review. And the importance of it in a design process, I think, is that a lot of times people approach the moment of a design project because some transformation is needed, right? Some transformation. It might be as simple as, or I say simple, it could be very physical, like the building is crumbling and we need to do something about that. Physical material. But there's always going to be something else that's happening. And so finding out through using existing literature some where you might get some value in anchoring the purpose of the project to a frame. And I say this because there are opportunities to pay attention. And by doing the literature review, you're also giving yourself some time to pay attention what existing values might be present that you don't even know. You're not even articulating. So it's a time to sort of slow down. And they don't have to take that long, but to pace yourself to see like what's the relevant literature to the current situation and climate. And also, I'm going to have this short note about AI, which is there's a lot that AI can do with bringing resources in from things that are out there that have been published. But they're going to tend to, when you use these large language models, they tend to repeat existing systems, so they don't get you to have a critical lens to what those systems might be that you want to be reframing and transforming. Then the role of history and context. Again, architects often use historical and contextual analysis, but and institutions are pretty aware of their histories, but they don't often have strong links to fully understand how physical environments play a role in that evolution of their institution. So I think just having a little bit of a rigor, of a multidisciplinary rigor to that is can be especially insightful. And then lastly, community engagement strategy. This is just the last of the deeper dives, which is, I think, that the important conversation that often happens when I'm talking to the architecture community is about this idea of sharing expertise. We come with our training, and we are experts in the field, but members of a community that we're working with, they are experts in that community. They are experts in their context. And so making a commitment to recognize and value their input is core, and sometimes undervalued or under-tended to in terms of communicating the value. So I use this image over on the right. Some of you may have heard of Arnstein's ladder. This is just a kind of a reference point. If you haven't, it's a great reference point for about how community engagement can just hit and reach communities at these different levels of kind of non-participation, which is down at the low end, to tokenism, which is where a lot of us tend to go. Even when we think we're doing really well, we tend to be sort of informing or consulting, but not actually kind of shifting ownership and partnering. That doesn't mean ceding control necessarily, but it does, that top part is really important to be mindful of, as to where there is ways of allowing control and shifting some power. Um, that now here's some trainings. Okay, so those were some big ideas as to how you can shape your practice and shape a project, the life of a project. But in terms of team trainings, like, so how do you actually like up your skills on your team? And here again, I've just these are I consider these, like, I've done this visual because it's a little bit more like building blocks. These can all work together. They can be standalone. The architects that I've partnered with, so different from institutions, but the architects I've partnered with have been especially said that they've, working with the social scientist, they've changed the way they do observations and field work. That they were like, oh, we do, first they went in there thinking like, oh, we do observations and field work, field notes. But then once they kind of got this social science lens, they're like, oh, actually, yeah, what we were doing before wasn't really that. So that's been that's some feedback that I've gotten that's very powerful for architects in terms of training. Same with coding and analysis tools and interview guides. So those and so but you can see and I think reflexivity. So anyway, you can see this whole little set of tiles. I want to also sort of just kind of um, say that this is a build. These also can build up these. There are other pieces that can fill in here, but these are some of the key highlight ones that I think are important. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what reflexivity means. And so when you do connect to any community, whether you're doing a sort of a very sort of specific designated type of community engagement, or you're just doing any kind of interview or engagement with your client, the reflexivity is a term in ethnography about being aware of your own position in the field. So how do you enter the space, and being aware of your own subjective point of view, that can be based on your age, race, gender, culture, religion, but it can also be your training, your education, your opinions. Where do those opinions come from? You don't have to then necessarily do a whole, like, tell them everything about yourself, but I think your own being aware of your own reflexivity and your positionality can really help you connect or mediate how you connect to clients. And sometimes that can be, if you have an awareness where there are some gaps, you might then be thinking about, like, how do you partner with someone who can fill some of the spaces that you don't fill. And the other, here I'm going to give you this resource, and I see there's some questions about resources as well, which can be shared easily. So this is one about observations and field notes. This is a toolkit. It's I think it's 20 pages. You can download it. It's on the CUNY Grad Center website for the Public Space Research Group. But you can just Google toolkit for the ethnographic study of space, and it's a really great guide to help you pay attention to this kind of ethnographic approach to studying space. This happens to be about studying public spaces, but it can be used for any kind of spaces. And what I like about this, and this is just the screenshot that I have, the clip on the right, shows the very basic thing that I teach this in most of my classes too, which was that the separating out, and this takes training and discipline to get facile with this, but separating out your observations that are objective, and then your thoughts and reflections that are your own opinions and reactions, because both are really important, but they're different, right? And those both happen at the same time. And so this sort of model of creating these sheets, of logging them, and registering them at the same time is quite powerful. And also spending time there, spending longer than you might think you're comfortable with. Just you extend it out a little bit, and then more observations start to unfold, or you have time to have those reflections about what might be happening here, even if it's not objectively observable. Um, and then, okay, so those are some of the tools that I'm just kind of sharing with you. But then, so advocacy, and I want to talk about advocacy, which is that what can we do with this approach? Where is this going? How can we use this to align with maybe something that's a little bit broader than a project, but maybe like a mindset or a typology, a mindset of or sets of norms. I don't really mean mindset. I mean, it's, abiding by a new set of norms that you think maybe it's time to shift. So now this brings me to something that I noticed about some of Princeton's commitments to their work and their community, which is and other communities have similarly been very kind of committed to tracking demographics and climate data about who's in their community, how are they navigating and responding to the climate of the experience of being part of a community. Sometimes it might be broken down into different spaces or over time or in different conditions. But I think that tracking this data is really quite, it's powerful and impactful and has done a lot for advancing different sets of values and goals. Um, I'm going to not go into all of the sort of changes into the climate of where we are with that now, but we feel change, right? We feel change. So how can we use the tools of environmental psychology to address this along with other things that I've been hearing about? And in fact, a conversation I had last week with someone from Princeton, it was about like how do we respond to the different body types, right? So I think this kind of goes also to to where how do athletes kind of come into a space that is sort of standardized for a certain type of student? How does someone of a background who's never spent time on a college campus navigate the things that they're going to encounter on a college campus? So here's sort of this classic arc of how have we been addressing the body. The baseline of the ideal body has been considered to be male for centuries. The classicism elevated it. Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, that's the image on the left, was from the 1490s. And this is not a dyslexia typo about those dates, but modernism perpetuated it when Le Corbusier came up with this modular man. So in the 1940s. So that's really sort of a variation on the same thing. Though modernism was sort of approaching it like that this is, buildings can be utilitarian and serve across culture, but in fact, it was modeling culture on one culture. And then this last image I really liked because it's this invitation that we're now really aware, and there is some great work advancing how spaces and health have treated the female body differently, whether it's maternal care or home versus workspaces. And yet, what have those results been? And so, which I think this question is an open one, and I think is worthy of further investigation, which is this direction that I think is quite interesting, and has where there is some momentum here, and I think this momentum is continuing, which is which is about how people make meaning through their bodies. And so this is in the social sciences, there was a bit of a turn to looking at embodiment 30 years ago, also very active in the last 10 years. It's taken some new levels of new knowledge being created, the knowledge that to be inclusive of different sensory inputs of neurodivergent folks, and also the work of people working with trauma, that trauma is held in your body, and how can that be undone through our spatial experiences. This kind of goes into the it can be tricky to find that out type of research, but I have found that you can learn a lot through what people say about their experiences. And again, this kind of goes to paying attention to what people say as being of high value, especially when trust has been built. That people think that when they say something, it's going to matter and have an impact. So here's a visual that I think kind of helps us to really like see bodies come in all shapes and sizes. Bodies have all sorts of abilities and limitations and opportunities and ways that make them going through space not standard. The last image on the right is, all the stuff that's going on in the brain about sensories, history, memory, how those experiences come carry with us into the spaces we use today, right? So it's not just the spaces that and the memories of spaces from the past, but we enter the spaces today with all the memories intact. And so here I just kind of put this prompt, and please feel free to kind of this would be something you can start to put in the Q&A. Erin and I can kind of engage in this towards the end. That we don't have a lead. Lead helped us navigate how do we build for more environmentally friendly, sustainable environments. What do we have as a standard to help us expand for body types and different types of experiences based on people's people with all of what they bring? And what would we want to do? Is there anything that we would want to do that would help us guide those decisions, like LEAD has? And I know LEAD isn't the only one. I'm just using that as a bit of a shorthand for a system that can be a guide, that can then be a common language. Because I do think that sometimes even having the language around what we're trying to mediate is such an important first step. And so I think that the guide can be it's an opportunity to help us manage spaces that normalize a range of body types without having to ask for an accommodation. Support a wide range of neurological and sensory needs, respond to social needs of a range of cultures and backgrounds, and adapt to our evolving user needs and preferences. I'm going to share with you some research that I have done. This is just going to be a short highlight of that research, which was this was the finding from my doctoral research, which was about, as Erin said at the beginning, about informal learning environments and how that can lead to people's sense of inclusion and bringing social equity. But there were 12 experiences that people needed and sought out on campus. Not everyone needed all of these types of experiences, but everyone needed some set of them. And that set might change over their time in the one college community. But hearing that it matters and identifying how your environment is providing these is a really helpful sort of entry point language for navigating. This is just the context of the community that I was studying, which is Medgar Evers College. It's the only predominantly Black college in the region. It's the youngest of the CUNY senior colleges located in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. The statistics at Medgar Evers just show that I think the main one here is the concerning low graduation rates. So the students who went to Medgar Evers had a lot at stake, staying in school and completing their degrees. And so what are the conditions on the campus that could help them do that? So studying students who were at the end and completing their four-year degrees was the population that I studied. And just looking at sort of the demographic of this population was a really helpful sort of way of seeing how many and how different everyone's lived experience was outside of what they were living on campus. So they get to campus, but all of this world that they have outside of campus and in their pasts is um, with them as they're navigating their time on campus. So I think I share this as like the snapshot of that it's very real that people are bringing their pasts and their outside of their past and current context with them. So here, I'm going to just sort of quickly, this is now goes into the training. I said that coding and analysis was one of the tools that also was really impactful in some of the partnerships that I've had. And here's one slide that goes into what one of the pillars, which is the pillar of about help, but then also shows you what coding and analysis can look like. So this is just a little bit of a sneak peek, under the hood of looking at what coding and analysis can look like. First, I'm just going to share with you what this finding of help was, which was that students, I'm going to read you the description. Students who talked about places where they received help and support referenced where they went for tutoring, advising, or a professor's office. But interestingly, they didn't talk about the physical description of these spaces. But at the same time, they talked about how important those spaces were. And for participant 17, it was essential that she was in person in a private office, but the office itself wasn't imbued with any notable material qualities. And so here's a quote from participant 17. And at the top, you can see a key where the coding was that first I coded the spaces, right? So I wanted to see, where are these things happening that people find important? So I coded for spaces, which is what got me to highlight this, kind of zero in on this quote. So I'm going to read you the quote now. Yeah, because every time since freshman year, I always went to her office crying. And then here we go into the red. Here was the barrier that she overcame. Where there was something wrong, where there was something that I felt overwhelmed. I was like, I don't know what to do. She always said, okay, mama, breathe, and then here's the embodied experience. And from there, everything flows like naturally every time I get to her office crying like desperate. And when I get out, I feel like relieved. Like, why didn't I know how to do this? After I spoke with her and she explains me this step, she said, you can do that. You can do it this way. I felt so relieved. So this participant would approach that office sort of knowing that something was going to change in her body. So this is something people know what's happening with them, right? People know what these experiences are and can share them. And this is just an example of what kind of a more rigorous approach to interviewing and then coding and analysis can look like. I have the same I've done the same sort of analysis for a few other of the pillars. I think I will do one more pillar and then sort of start to wrap up and see what kind of questions we have and that you guys may have for the last little bit of the webinar. So here's one about identity, but I think I'm going to go to well, yeah, okay, I'm on identity. Let's stay with identity. So here, the finding was that the identity pillar about becoming and building something, there's a strong corresponding literature of about bonding through culture, through cultural similarities, that supports this. And participant 11 described themselves as being newly discovered gender fluid. And they found the Women's Center on their second day of college. It was one of the places where they spent the most time. And until COVID-19 closed the campus. And then during COVID, when they were at home, campus was shut down. That disrupted the spatial pillar of being able to go to the Women's Center when they were exploring this emerging gender identity, and they weren't sharing that with their family. And so this was a difficult time for participant 11 to be navigating that without that place. And so here we have the key and the narrative are that the participant said, oh, it was the second day, my second day of college. I met with someone I know. We talked, we were walking, talking, interacted for a bit. with each other for a bit. And then the where, she introduced me to the Women's Center because she told me this is where she found her place before. And I, the embodied experience, stuck around there ever since. Um, the barrier, I didn't feel like I wanted to walk around and be lost all on my own. So there were similar quotes like this where people found sort of like some cultural connections with people where they would seek out folks from the same country where their parents were from in the cafeteria who always sat in the same corner, and they really valued going there and finding sort of kind of similar interests that just made them feel for them it was an issue. It was for them, it was both identity of having finding communities in places, and that then became part of what the quality of that place became imbued with. Um, so again, same pattern explored with access to nature and light. And interestingly, in this one, people didn't tend to describe that they went to see a place because of the quality of the light or access to nature, but they loved the place and they would go there and they would do this and they would do that there. And then they would describe what the qualities were. So it was kind of an interesting, I think that we as designers usually will put that as like a higher on the list of what we think people are seeking, but it kind of came out in narratives to be a little bit secondary. But that doesn't mean it's secondary in importance. It just becomes secondary in their description of it. So how do we use the lexicon? I think that this is just sort of the high level, which is that it can be used a way of structuring discussions, observations, and interviews. It reframes what to ask and what to notice. And I think this is also one of these cases where it helps to understand operations versus design. And some people like some students really liked going into these unlocked classrooms as a place to find respite and hang out with their friends. And that's a procedures thing, right? So there was a culture around facilities folks leaving classrooms not locked when they weren't being used. So I think that's just an important sort of management kind of way to bear in mind. And also, they can be used anywhere for other communities. And it might be important, but I think what it introduces, though, especially is it introduces so again, it introduces the language of talking about experience, but also in other communities, there may be other pillars. And I think that it's a lexicon you can build in your community. In some cases, there may be some language that's a little bit different. Um, and that can be important to find out. Um, and yeah, so I want to then just move to kind of this wrapping it up into how do we apply, what through applying strategies of environmental psychology, what can you do? So hopefully this has given you a little bit of an arc of seeing that I can help you align design and management of spaces with values underpinned by existing research, help you understand what those values are, what the background to those might be. Another is applying rigor in your practice that allows you to let people have their needs met, listening to voices, the skill of ways of deepening ways of listening and observing. And then lastly, creating new knowledge to advocate for different design or management, space management practices, whether it's a specific typology or a specific set of needs. So that's kind of like me bringing these pieces together. Hopefully some of that came together for you as well. I would like to open up to the Q&A and discussion. I know that discussion would be with me and Aaron looking at the questions in the chat. I think so Aaron has been fielding this. I can open the Q&A, but maybe Aaron, I'll invite you to come back onto the screen with me. You're muted.
I said bravissima. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.
This is so great. So there's a handful of different questions, and we can pick from them. We have one here coming asking about Christopher Alexander's pattern language, and I think you and I were carrying that around. I think mine got water damaged and is long gone. I may have to go try to find a used version because I actually haven't seen that book for a long
Oh,
time.
I actually have it right here. Like literally, like I can
I
touch it with
pull
my.
it. Yeah. So somebody's asking about Christopher Alexander's pattern language being considered a guide of sorts for human behavior in the physical environment. So maybe you want to talk about
Oh,
maybe compare, contrast why it would work,
yeah.
wouldn't.
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think that the here, actually let me just pull this out. Not that I'm gonna I haven't dog-eared it or anything. Ta-da. And I don't think this is, by the way, I don't think this is the original copy, Aaron, from our days. I think that this was from someone at the CUNY Graduate Center who like left it. Um, but I think that this is I think that what the pattern language, and again, I didn't, even though it's right next to me, I haven't been perusing it lately. Um, what I think is less addressed in pattern language is this emphasis on experience and difference and variety. And I think that I kind of use the modular man as like a spark, right? I use that as a spark. And I think that that's an opportunity. I think it's the opportunity to go beyond the language of the spaces and into the um, what is the constellation of the things that we are seeking? What are the experiences that we're seeking?
Hmm.
Does that,
I
I don't
think
know.
that's a great reference, though, because of your diagrams that I've seen and stuff. So if you ever want to, like, if you ever want to, I think a book like Christopher Alexander's a pattern language, but dealing with environment, like really, like experiential environment, right, and
I
cultural
think it's
environment.
it's a good invitation actually, though. It's a good invitation for me. I would like to kind of maybe go back there now that this set of pillars is coming, um, is sort of is rolling out, like to see where what's missing here, or if it's there, but just not the front line, not the front line, not the headline. Because he headlines on like sets of places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question though. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Love that question. Somebody else is also saying that they agree with the CPTED defensible space techniques, and that they presented it. That would be Joe Bianco, class of 70. So, what is CPTED
Oh,
defense?
SEPTED, that's defensible space. In fact, I have Newman's book on that shelf back there. So Oscar Newman. So interestingly, was that question fully, was
A
that the full
comment.
question?
No, it
Was it
wasn't.
a
It was a
comment?
fully baked
Okay.
question. It was just I'm asking the question based on the comments that he made.
Listen, I think that SEPTED is which is the idea that people, I think the original part of the idea, and it sounds like the person who made that comment may have applied this a lot in their work, but the, there's this original view idea of it being that spaces and eyes on street can
Mm,
really help create communities that then are safe because people are it's designed so that places aren't dark, you're not having the entryways that are obscured. The spaces in front of you are the sort of semi public spaces between homes are observed, and so that therefore makes it like sort of um, safe because the community is caring for it. I think that those are really great principles. I think that sometimes the values of the principles of SEPTED have been taken in a lot of directions that can become more controversial. So I think I'm going to leave it at that.
okay.
I'm going to leave it at that. It can become more controversial because it starts to get inequitable and starts to get who's policing who,
Uh,
and how surveillance can be deployed
mhm,
to target some communities more than others.
mhm. Very interesting. Yes, yes. Yes, I
Um,
think that we even
yeah.
had that back when we were at UCLA, this talk about surveillance and sort of like, to surveil to keep the individual safe versus a surveillance to keep the viewer in control. So yeah, that's a good place to skip to the next question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or,
No, I mean,
and it's actually layered more than that too, right? It's to
I th
catch people, and then you're catching people in that environment, and it really opens a can of worms. We could have another, yeah, that would
I
be
think
an
I think it's
in-person
interesting.
combo.
I think that actually, yeah, I don't know. This is where I would love to, if this is an opportunity for to expand the dialogue. I think that because I think it's really interesting. And some people dismiss it altogether because of how it's been used. I don't dismiss it. Um, but I do wish some of the original intentions could be considered and
Okay,
applied a
we
little
only
bit
have
more.
five
Yeah.
more minutes,
So
so
yeah,
I'm
what
going to
else do we
kind
have
of,
here?
yes, I'm going
Yeah.
to kind of just throw out a couple easy ones. Is there, these are just like, do you have a reading list like on your website, recommended books? If practitioners and sort of like everyday architects who, can only have time to read a book and not get a PhD, like, are
Oh,
there any
yeah,
resources that
you
you
know
can
what's
share at some point,
you know it's funny. I
or just a
definitely have
couple right here?
I have
Mm,
so many I have so many types of resources. I didn't do a resource page on this particular presentation.
sure.
Um, I think that I really like tests. I really like the observing, the toolkit for the study of ethnographic space. No, sorry, the toolkit for ethnographic study of space, TESS, TESS. Um, I really like that one for an ethnographic observation tool. So I think that's an easy share. In terms of reading list, I would say reach out to me. Oh, here, my last slide, since we have like the 2 minute, 3 minutes left, is the contact me.
Oh, beautiful.
So the last slide is the contact me slide. I think it's I think there are so many resources. It's hard to just sort of say here are the 10, right?
Yeah.
So if you have questions
Or
about
even
anything
three, yeah.
specific,
But I
yeah,
think you answered it. There's your, if anybody wants to have some resources or ask for some easy,
yeah. I,
like
I
read on a weekend and just be a little bit better on Monday kind of books.
I
That's
like
you.
sharing tests because it's downloadable and it's free. And I find a lot of times with books or journal articles, it's like
Uh-huh.
there's a paywall. Are you really gonna read the whole
Right, right,
book?
right.
Like so yeah. So
So we can't answer all the questions. So I mean, another one that is kind of like how can practitioners engage with environmental psychologists? Like, do you go in for a day? Do you do a workshop? That kind of thing. So I think having your email there, that's a good one. Um, you know,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I
and
think yes. Oh, so
mm,
I mean I think that the answer is the it is be and I think this is where but like the email me call me kind of thing, which is that I think that some projects a one day a scholar for a day can be a great brainstorm for framing, and sometimes that can be quite simply like a quite simple and powerful approach, because I think a lot of times, and I hope you kind of you sort of hear me say, and this is for sure a lens that from working at NYU and facilities, which was that like a lot of architects have these like really wonderful design solutions, right? But it's not underpinned in a way that sometimes can help justify a particular approach, particular decision, a particular advocacy for funding, a particular like so with a little bit of underpinning, like this can be like add just an oomph of power. So sometimes it's that, sometimes it's really like, oh, this community has some issues that are really tricky. We need to get at it from a way that needs a sort of a very solid and consistent commitment. Um, so I think that those are two different approaches. But I think that, yeah, for sure, there's like consult for a day. I offer like the whole like workshopy thing because that's where from partnering with architects in the past that have integrated some methods into their practice, um, has been quite powerful and like a very like a great outcome from a social science architect collaboration. And that happened after collaborating on a project that then they were like, oh, I now use this. So the training could be, yeah, it could be training or partnering, and then you have more skill sets in-house. Um,
So it's 12:59. I only had one more that I was kind of interested in throwing in there regarding women's issues and carrying culture, carrying space, cultural space in one's body. Just was curious regarding women, for example, Muslim women in spaces where Western women are typically uncovered. So, and that can be a massive sort of discomfort, as well as safety for women at night on campuses, et cetera. Is there any way that you'd like? That there do you is I guess the real question is there any way to use this data to sell to clients safety when they're talking about return on investment? That's a totally loaded question. You probably
Gosh.
can't answer it right here,
Okay, wait,
but
wait. There's a lot of things there. There's a lot of things there. I think I might want to talk about like I think maybe with the culture of dress and appearance. Um, that's not safety or return on investment, but I do think that there is a this kind of I would say is it building cultural bridges. I think that spaces, if the invitation is there to talk about to open conversations in language. Like I know one of the projects at NYU, and we're right at the time, but I think that bridging through what is it like to go through space wearing a head covering, right? For Western women to hear more about that, Western people, women, men, to hear more about what that is like from people who they're encountering in space can just be very powerful learning, right? These can be very powerful cultural moments where it's not um, where it's where you're highlighting a shared experience that can then bridge difference. So I think that spaces can do that, but you have to have that invitation to have the conversation too. So that's operations, right? So that's operations. I think return on investment is
so
is a,
selling that safety when they don't think you need to do it. So if you have a client that says, "I just need the most efficient return on investment to sell," that's like another workshop for you. Is
or
to
I think it's
sell.
another I think it's another workshop, but I think that's where the research and advocacy can come in, which is like you can if you have if there's one particular set of values that are actually you think that you can align some data around whether you're doing literature research or whether you're doing research about your context, community, and population, you have something to back you up. It's not your opinion, right? You actually have something to back you up. So that can then help. And then without in abstract, it's hard to say how you show the return on investment, but because it depends what it is. But I think that you can then make an argument. You can make an argument. Yeah.
What a beautiful, beautiful session. What a beautiful hour. You really, really packed it in
I
and
can't believe it. Yeah, I can't believe the time has
we had
flown.
64 people, so that's really good for us. And so I thank every one of those 64 people that showed up. Thank you, Christina Goldstein, for taking care of the recording. We can end the recording now. Would be a good time to end the recording. And just